Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you details of key national and international issues. Today's is a budget special episode, a day after the union budget was presented by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman on 1st of February. We'll bring you the details of the key aspects of union budget. Now, the union budget this year had a significant focus on infrastructure, which includes a big push in highways expansion, railways, river linking, PM housing scheme, Nal Se Jal scheme and infra development projects in northeastern states as well. Seeking to step up public investment, the government has raised capital expenditure by 35.4% to 7.5 lakh crore or 2.9% of GDP. For more details of various aspects of the union budget, we have with us today none other than Dr. T.V. Somanathan, Secretary with the Department of Expenditure in the Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Welcome, Dr. Somanathan, to Sansad Television. We'll try and understand, of course, various aspects of the budget. But first of all, many congratulations from myself and the entire Sansad TV team on successful presentation of the budget on 1st of February. You and your team seem to have done a lot of work there. Let's begin with the capital expenditure because, the buzzword since yesterday after the budget has been presented has been capex. Now, capital expenditure, the rise there of around 35.4%. Two aspects which our viewers would like to understand is what's the rationale behind having such a steep hike, and also where is all that money going to come from?
Sure. So, to answer your first question, the rationale behind the steep increase in capital expenditure, which, by the way, is the second consecutive year that this has been done. A similar percentage increase was done in the budget for 2021-22. So, this is part of a concerted strategy to rejuvenate economic growth in the country and to create jobs, to create gainful employment, not jobs that are part of a safety net, but to create actual, real, gainful jobs. So why have we decided on capital expenditure? There are both economic theory and empirical studies specific to India show that capital expenditure has a high multiplier effect, and therefore 1 rupee of capital expenditure has a GDP effect of more than 1 rupee, and typically somewhere between 2 and 3 rupees, because of the fact that if we spend 100 rupees, that leads to a further spending of, say, 80 rupees at the second tier, and then 60 rupees in the third tier, 40 rupees in the fourth, and so on. I'm just using hypothetical numbers, but there are studies both by the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy in 2013 and a more recent study by the Reserve Bank of India in 2019, which indicate a multiplier for capital expenditure of much greater than 1 and in fact greater than 2. So on the other hand, money that is spent as revenue expenditure results in a GDP effect of less than 1 rupee. So spending 1 rupee on, let's say, a cash transfer would have a positive GDP effect of less than 1 rupee. So when we are in a situation where we have suffered a serious shock in output because of the pandemic, and we want to restore growth as quickly as possible, capital expenditure offers the best alternative to get the biggest bang for the rupee. Okay. And that is the reason why we have prioritized capital expenditure in this budget. Okay. Did I answer your question or was something left?
No, the first part is done, but the second part and the most important one as well, in simple terms, where will it come from?
Yeah, so it will come from two sources. One is an increase in revenue. So we expect next year's revenue to be higher than this year's by a net amount of 10%. This 10% increase has two components. Taxes other than excise duty on petrol and diesel are expected to grow by about 14%. The taxes on excise duty, that is the excise duty on petrol and diesel, is actually expected to decline because the rates were reduced in November, both on petrol and in diesel. So the total collection of excise duty will actually decline in 2022-23. So the net effect of a 14% increase in other taxes and a decline in excise duty is estimated at a 10% net growth.
Okay.
So we're expecting part of this additional capital expenditure to be funded in the form of tax revenue. The other part will be by enhanced borrowing. So our borrowing is increasing from approximately 15.1 lakh crores to about 16.6 lakh crores. So that's the rough breakdown of where the funds will come from.
Okay. And what are the expectations in terms of investment? Because, of course, this steep hike in capital expenditure and the amount of money which you're pointing out will be spent out there, of course, spells out the government's intent to go ahead and spend more and, push that cycle of investment. But in return, how do you assess or how do you expect the private investment pouring in?
Private investment is not as high as we would like it to be. That is one of the problems that we are facing currently. There has been, historically, we've had some fairly problematic years over the last decade, starting with the crisis in 2012-13, followed by which there has been no crisis, but what has been described as the twin balance sheet problem, where the bank's balance sheet were under stress because they had a large amount of non-performing assets, and corporate balance sheets were also under stress. They owed a large amount to banks, and they were owing large amounts to others as well. So neither of them, the corporates were not really in a position to invest in a big way, and the banks were not prepared to lend to them in a big way because they didn't have the funds either. Both of those problems have receded considerably over the last 3 to 4 years. The banks are in a much better position now than they were. And company balance sheets have also improved. Some companies have fallen by the wayside, but the remaining companies have much stronger balance sheets now. What is currently a big factor in private investment is, of course, the profitability of any investments they make. And that would depend on the level of demand in the economy. So the expectation is that if we, from the government, do a sort of pump priming in terms of enhanced government public expenditure on capital, that will trigger an increase in demand, which in turn is likely to catalyze an increase in private capital investment, because when they see that their order books are full and their capacity utilization is high, they tend to start investing in new capacity. That creates new capacity, new jobs, new employment opportunities, new income, and so on.
Okay.
So we are hopeful that the strategy of increasing capital expenditure sharply this year will provide the catalyst for a revival of private investment.
Okay. Let's now look at various sectors, Dr. Somanathan, and let's begin with infrastructure, because that seemingly is the key focus area or another buzzword after capital expenditure if you're looking at. And infra, of course, various aspects, be it national highways, railways, river linking projects as well. If you could take us through to the key components there and key areas where the focus of the government will be for this year and for the forthcoming year, because the Finance Minister, began her finance speech by saying that this budget will lay the foundation for Amrit Kal, that is from 75 years of India's independence to 100 years of India's independence. So how are we looking at this?
So the major sectors where the capital expenditure push will come are, and you've actually named most of them: highways, the national highways, railways, telecommunications, and defense capital expenditure, particularly domestic defense procurement. So these are the 4 big areas where incremental funds are being spent. In addition, there's a very important point that I want to repeat. It was mentioned in the budget speech, but it bears repetition, which is that we are earmarking a sum of 1 lakh crores of rupees to be lent to state governments as interest-free 50-year loans to be incurred by them on capital expenditure. So this is the other major additionality, and this will, of course, be spent by state governments on their capital projects, for which we are providing a capital loan from here.
Okay.
So these are the broad components. Central sector is highways, railways, defense, and telecommunications, the big increases. There are small increases elsewhere. There's also a fairly big increase in border roads and border villages. But the other main feature is capital expenditure by state governments.
Okay. Let's also, shift a bit of focus towards the social sector, because those are really important aspects as well. What are the key takeaways when we're talking about education and health there?
In education, I think we are at the stage in our country where it is, at least in terms of school education, the problem is not so much financial as quality. So it's not as if during the pandemic we didn't have money to pay teacher salaries or to run the schools. It is that the schools could not be run for reasons completely non-financial. Now there, the approach in this budget is to solve a non-financial problem non-financially in terms of providing for remedial instruction in a manner that can be accessed by the poor, by people in remote areas, by people without smartphones, by people without laptops or iPads. So that is by widening the number of television channels to include every regional language and every class from 1 to 12. So this would be accessible on Doordarshan to every family in the country. And this is expected to help remedy the learning gap that has arisen over the last 2 years. Incidentally, the education budget has also received a substantial increase in the budget for 2022-23. In terms of health, there is a substantial increase measured from last year's budget estimates. And it's gone up from, I may not be having the exact number, it's gone up from roughly 73,000 crores to approximately 86,000 or 87,000 crores. Of course, the revised estimates for this year are more than the 73,000 crores in this year's budget estimates, because there was a special COVID emergency response program for which we had allocated a substantial sum of money. But if you exclude the special provisions for COVID, there is a substantial increase in the health budget next year.
Okay, so health continues to be the focus area when we're talking about, the road ahead from here. Now, another important sector, and that is an area which has always been considered the bedrock of Indian economy. That's the agriculture sector. And we saw how during the COVID period as well, when most of the sectors like manufacturing or MSME and even services took a hit, the agriculture sector grew at around 3.6%. Now, the question is, what is being done there? Of course, the budget talks about a focus on, the chemical-free natural farming as well, crop diversification, and river linking projects will obviously have an impact on the agri sector also.
On agriculture, I think the main thrust of the budget is to continue with the many good initiatives that have already been launched. There's full funding for the PM Kisan program, which is a direct income transfer to farmers. In addition, and this is not necessarily seen in the agriculture department's budget, but it's actually part of the budget of the Department of Rural Development, there's a very substantial increase in the budget provision for the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, which is increasing from 15,000 crores in the current year to 19,000 crores next year, an increase of 27%. This is something that helps bring produce to market, reduces the transaction costs for farmers, and thereby increases farm incomes, while simultaneously providing a lot of productive employment in rural areas. Other features of the budget are that there is adequate funding for the fertilizer subsidy, both current year and next year. There is full funding for the different programs of the Ministry of Agriculture. And above all, the government has continued to procure food grains under the MSP at record quantities. So all of these initiatives are fully funded. There's also funding for increasing the acreage under edible oils and for transitioning from food grains to crops like edible oils and pulses. But
another, significant amount being allocated out there to the new ministry, which was instituted as the Ministry of Cooperatives, around 900 crore, if I'm not mistaken, and that seemingly would also lend a bit of a helping hand when we're talking about the agri sector and the rural, areas.
Certainly. That's primarily towards agricultural credit. And you're right, it is definitely something that is of direct relevance and benefit to the agriculture sector.
Okay, let's now talk about the urban planning as well and urban development, because earlier you were speaking about how the focus as far as infra is concerned is on a lot of projects out there, but during the speech, the finance minister laid a lot of emphasis on how a planning for sustainable cities, and it's not just about mega cities, even tier 2, tier 3 cities as well, is the need of the day. How is the roadmap ahead? Because I believe there's a committee which will be set up, and from there onwards, in terms of funds, in terms of money allocation, or in terms of project implementation planning, how are we moving ahead?
The primary requirement for more sustainable cities, more livable cities, is not actually funds, it's better urban planning. Funds are required, but funds are also available. Many cities, at least the bigger cities, have fairly good tax revenues of their own from property tax and many other sources. But what is the need, or what is missing, is the policies that would enable cities to grow with good public transport, with a clean environment, with good sanitation, with sustainable water and sewerage systems. So it is actually not primarily a financial issue, it's a policy issue. And it is for that reason that the government has announced this committee. They have announced support to the starting of 4 centers of excellence in urban planning. There is an announcement in the budget that the funds that are going to states in the 1 lakh crores of capital support loans will have, in some cases and for some components, conditionality attached to modernizing building bylaws, changing FSI requirements, so that there is densification and better coordination with public transport and so on. So there are a whole host of interventions, some financial, some non-financial. And there is support in the form of the Smart Cities program and the Amrut program, both of which again have received substantial funding in the budget.
Okay. Coming back to the Texas part, Dr. Somanathan, because when we are listening to the finance minister, and when she came to these 2 aspects, that is direct taxes and indirect taxes, of course, everybody was hoping for something or the other. Not at all, any tinkering done with the income tax slabs, but there is some more leeway given to startups and new manufacturing units out there as well. Of course, there were some explanations vis-a-vis the implications or the implementation of some aspects of the Income Tax Act.
This is basically, the approach has been stability in taxation, stability in tax rates, stability in tax laws. There are a few changes in regard to sorting out certain anomalies. For instance, there were cases where cooperative societies had a higher tax rate than companies, and that has been modified. There were cases where one kind of capital gain had a different tax rate from another, and that has been rationalized. So overall, there are neither increases nor decreases. There are some measures which are intended to improve the coverage of taxation and prevent tax evasion. So there are provisions, for instance, for introducing a tax deduction on source on free benefits that are provided to dealers and agents by companies. And of course, there was a big new provision on to give clarity to the taxation of virtual digital assets, which are often called crypto instruments or crypto assets.
Okay.
So I think those were the main features. And in the field of virtual digital assets, it's a flat rate tax of 30%, which is on par with the taxation of other speculative instruments and speculative income.
Okay, if you could, explain a bit further when we're talking about virtual digital assets, because that's of, interest to many out there in the viewers. One aspect is what changes, and second aspect is what does it indicate in terms of the government's stance vis-a-vis virtual digital assets or cryptocurrencies as they are known usually?
Okay, so the first point is under the Income Tax Act, all incomes except agricultural incomes are taxable. There is nothing that is inherently non-taxable. There are some specific exemptions and deductions for certain kinds of income which are provided in the law. But the general rule is that everything is taxable. And even, by the way, I'm not necessarily indicating that income from crypto assets is illegal, but even illegal income is taxable. If somebody collects a bribe, then quite apart from the criminal prosecution, that person is taxable on the bribe.
Along with the penalties.
So the first point is crypto transactions, virtual digital asset transactions are and have been taxable from whenever they have been occurring. So it is not an introduction of taxation on crypto assets. They were taxable. But since there was no specific legal provision on how these were taxed, the general rules of taxation are such that it is possible for them to be taxed in different circumstances in different ways. So if you're running a business of crypto asset dealing, then it could be a business income. If you're buying them as a capital asset and selling them over a period of time, it could be a capital gain. And so in this form, there was ambiguity, but let me be very clear. It was taxable always. Indeed. It is taxable today, and it will remain taxable tomorrow. But what the budget has done is to say that from the 1st of April, any transactions in crypto assets will form a special class of income and will be taxed under a special rate of 30%, which will apply to all the income. And there are some restrictions on setting off. You cannot use losses from crypto assets to reduce your taxes on other income. And you can't carry forward your losses from crypto transactions from one year to another. Okay. So this is broadly what has been provided for. Okay. You had another question. This particular decision in unison with the fact that the government will come up with a digital currency. What does it indicate? No, let me clarify again. The taxation of virtual digital assets doesn't indicate anything about what the government will do on the regulation of. That's the honest answer. It doesn't do anything. It neither says that they will be regulated or will not be banned, nor does it say that they will be banned and will not be. So this is completely a parallel track. It is a track that clarifies the taxability of these transactions. Now coming to the implied part of your question. So whether to ban or not to ban, whether to regulate or not to regulate. And by the way, let me explain. It is possible to have a thing which is legal, which is taxable, and which is not regulated. So there are many sources of income which are not regulated, and they are taxable, and they are not illegal. So there is no dichotomy between legality and regulation, and it is not as if it is legal only if it's regulated. Okay. But regulation is something that is done to protect one or other group of persons in a transaction. So regulation, so theoretically you can have a ban, you can have regulation, or you can have no ban and no regulation. All three possibilities are separate from the tax treatment, and nothing needs to be read into the tax provisions regarding what will happen on those fronts. The government will consult widely, as the Finance Minister explained yesterday. The government is also looking at international practice in terms of how to regulate, because these assets do cross borders, and it's not easy for India to impose a regulation unilaterally. Indeed. It's possible, but it's difficult. So there are a number of issues that are under consideration. International practices, there's a lot of consultation going on with various domestic stakeholders, and any decision on the regulatory aspects will come separately. No indication is to be read into the tax treatment in terms of one way or the other.
Okay, that detailed answer from you with the virtual digital assets should satisfy most of the queries out there in the public. One last quick question before we wrap this up, Dr. Somanathan, and that is the budget has been presented, and it has put in place a vision. It has put in place the way the government will earn its money and spend in the same for the next financial year, and the plan for the next 25 odd years as well. What are the key challenges which you see on the path to achieving that targeted growth and also maintaining that fiscal discipline?
So the main challenges that I see are actually those which are outside the control of the government, and there are many. First is, of course, the situation regarding health and the pandemic. Now, for 2 consecutive years, we have been the economy has been disrupted by events that are completely non-economic. So you had the first wave in 2020-21, you had the second wave in 21-22, you have a milder third wave which is ongoing. That is a factor which economic planners and budget makers cannot really anticipate with any degree of accuracy. So that remains a sort of wild card that can come in and either disrupt or not disrupt our plans. We can only be mentally ready for such disruptions by making sure that we have answers if it occurs. And I can assure you that the government is prepared to deal with such eventualities if they occur.
Okay.
The second set of issues which are beyond our control are international developments, and particularly in relation to things like the price of crude oil, the price of important commodities that have a bearing on our subsidy budgets like fertilizers, and the effect of monetary policy in the United States and in Europe, particularly the United States, on the preferences of foreign investors. So if interest rates in the United States begin to rise, and if quantitative easing, as it is being called for all these years by the Federal Reserve, is reversed into quantitative tightening, then there will be impacts on the investment preferences of foreign investors. And they may choose to put more of their money into their domestic securities in the US, and less into emerging markets. That could have some effects for us. But even there, I would say that India is in a fairly resilient position. We have adequate foreign exchange reserves, and our fiscal deficit is not is high, but it's not unsustainable, and our debt level is sustainable, and we are committed to its consolidation. So I think we are ready to weather the storm if there were one.
Okay, there it is. That explains a lot of things. Thank you so much, Dr. T.V. Somanathan, for sharing your views and insights on the union budget. That was Dr. Somanathan, Secretary in the Department of Expenditure with the Ministry of Finance, talking about various aspects of the union budget, which was presented on 1st of February, and a document which clearly outlines the government's intentions in terms of policies, in terms of the money which will be spent on various aspects. The capital expenditure hike out there and the focus on infrastructure projects and development clearly points out as to where the government wants the money to be spent. We'll come back again tomorrow with a different aspect. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.